Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. So today we're talking about how you can challenge your understanding of how privilege and bias affects your mindset. This is the second episode in a series of webinars for aspiring leaders to help you prepare and apply for leadership positions and to develop a stronger leadership presence. This webinar will consider ideas, tools and tips for challenging your own privilege and bias. It aims to develop understanding of the impact of privilege and bias on ourselves and on our lives, provide a space for creative thinking and discussion about taking positive action, support our knowledge and understanding of what makes us who we are and the power of language and communication, explore opportunities for making conscious, fairer judgments. Now, my name's Naomi Dixon and I work for the Society for Education and Training and I will be supporting the webinar today. If you have any technical queries or questions, do please pop them in the box underneath the presentation and I'll get to you as soon as I can. Now, today's presenter is Pauline Odulinski. Now, Pauline is a retired CEO and principal, currently working on a wide range of projects in business, further and higher education, including strategic planning and business systems, change management, and mentoring and coaching CEOs and senior leaders. She's currently chair of City College Plymouth, director of the Women's Leadership Network, and a fellow and visiting professor at Buckinghamshire New University. And so for today's webinar, I'm now going to pass over to Pauline.
Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar. And first of all, I'd like to say that if you have any questions or any queries as we go through, please do send them through. It feels really quite strange talking to you without having a response. But I'm looking forward to sharing some thoughts with you, and I very much would appreciate any feedback, positive or developmental. So this is quite a challenging topic, I think, for us all. What is privilege and bias, and how does it affect us, and how does it come about? I'd like to sort of say, first of all, that we all have privilege of some kind, and we all have bias of some kind. So let's get that out on the table. And it's not right and it's not wrong. It's just the way in which we as human beings are unique. We are complex individuals and we are affected by our lives. So when we're born, we are brought up and nurtured and developed in a kind of way. And all of that affects our thinking, the way in which we see the world, and affects whether we have more privilege or less privilege, or we have more bias or less bias. The key thing for me, which we will talk about in detail as we go through the presentation, is that understanding that and doing self-reflecting on how we use that knowledge and understanding in our everyday lives to make the world a better place for others. So our interactions with others is really quite important. So the way we live, our parents, our community, our social life, our economic environment, from the very beginning of our lives, really shape our thinking, our values, our beliefs and our behaviours. And we're all building this into our characters. So the other thing I want to just say about privilege is the flip side of bias. And we need to be aware of this because privilege is about being, from my point of view, I'm white. So that is a privilege. I understand that I'm in a majority that is more privileged than people that come from minority groups who have to work harder to get their voices heard in some ways. So that's just one example. But the more I'm aware of my own privilege and my own bias, the more I feel I can show empathy and understanding, and sort of that really makes an impact on the way in which I work. So just for those of you that are not too familiar with the thinking of unconscious bias and what it is, I thought it would be useful just to refresh our knowledge and understanding of it. And a simple way of understanding unconscious bias is that it is unconscious because we have two cognitive systems in our brain, that we have the fast part and the slow part. It will not surprise you, I'm sure, to know that the fast part of our brain we use most. It's about 90% of what we do, we use the fast part of our brain. So all of that upbringing and all of that knowledge that we've built up through our life means that we do things in a conscious way that it is built up from our past. We've developed skills, we do it on autopilot. So we do things at pace and we just do them automatically. Whereas when we're talking about privilege and bias and how it affects us and how it affects our mindset, we need to actually use the slow part of our brain, which is our thinking part, which we have to actually consciously think about, make effort to do, and that is very often through reflection and being self-aware and questioning ourselves more. And that is a conscious thing that, if you're interested in this type of work, is a very useful thing to do. So, as this slide shows, if you are asking yourself, how do I address my biases if I don't know I have them? Well, the best way to do that is to kind of start to think about it. I don't know about you, but I very often, when I'm trying to reflect, I reflect on those little voices in my head. When I'm getting ready to do a presentation like today, I'll be preparing myself, I'll be confident about my knowledge and my understanding of what I want to put over. But there's always that little voice in my head that says, what if I make a mistake? What if I can't remember the script? What if I don't do it very well? And all of those little voices that we get all the time in our head, which counteracts what we're trying to think about. So, and the best way of describing reflection in unconscious bias is to remember when those things happen that you have to switch on the conscious part of your brain to say, actually, that's nonsense. I'm well prepared. I can do this. So, moving on, taking inclusion and diversity is centred in that reflective part of the brain. And so much of what we think is logical, and we're rational, and we make rational decisions. But what we are trying to do is to then develop techniques and nudges in which we can actually kind of move forward. So the idea in this session is I'm going to talk to you a bit later on about some what I call nudges, some things that we can do to change our thinking. One of the things I would like to suggest is that it is useful to think about what we hear and also reflect on, we are seeing it through our own lens, through our own culture and values and style. We have our preferences that are built up on the basis of the world we know as we know it. Others will be thinking about things from their own lens and may define it really differently. And that is one of our challenges when we're trying to think about how we work with people and live with people more effectively. For example, we might like the sound of what we are saying. So we're articulating an argument or a proposition, and we think, I've really logically thought this through, and I'm really confident about my opinion. But remember, with that comes the immediate bias that we're reflecting on. If we, on the other hand, disagree, we have to think about whether we're being curious enough about others listening to it and their viewpoint. Where are they coming from? What value judgments are they putting on what they're hearing, and listening and coming to a consensus view about what's right. It has to be based on the circumstances and the situation. There is no right and no wrong with that. My message is really believe in yourself. If you believe in yourself and you mirror the best you, and you do live this reflective practice that I'm suggesting, it really is, from my point of view, it's been really powerful to make sure that I am trying to be as fair as I possibly can be when I'm working, when I'm living, but more importantly, in my role, I have to make value judgments all the time on appointments to positions, and I think recruiting and retraining and developing people is a really important part of remembering to think about your biases. Who are we leaving out? Who are we excluding because of where I've come from and my thinking? I don't know whether any of you will be familiar with the writer Benjamin Zander. He has a very good book called The Art of Possibility, and in his book he describes some examples, and his way of thinking is the way in which we communicate is terribly important. So the example of the shoe salesman is one example, and that is that he talks about two shoe salespeople who went to a remote part of Uzbekistan and wanted to develop and promote the sale of shoes for the particular company they worked for. And after one day, one of the shoe people came back, sent a message back via email to say, coming home on the next plane, stop, nobody here wears shoes. Second salesperson emails back and said, fantastic opportunity, going to be here at least 2 weeks, it's no one here wears shoes. And it's the difference in the way in which we view that situation that absolutely says whether it's an opportunity or it's a threat. Benjamin Zander also talks about his time as being the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra. And because he recognises the power of positive thinking and speaking and communicating, he, on his first day at the new class, he had the orchestra coming in, they were going to be studying for the year, and he said to them, right, at the end of the year you have all got an A. And they all looked at him, and he said, yes, your grade will be an A at the end of the year. And one of them said, how can that be? And he said, right, what I want you to do is go home tonight, and by tomorrow I want you to bring in a letter that you're going to write to me, telling me writing it when at the end of the year, telling me how successful you've been in getting your A, and these are the reasons why you got the A. And he said, by doing that, it raised their expectations of themselves. They had something to aim for, they had something to live up to, and he said the results of that exercise were so much more positive and more productive than if he'd gone in and said, if you work hard at the end of the year, I will grade you and some of you will get an A. So what I'm saying is partly about the way we think, but also the way in which we communicate. So in Benjamin Zander's world, there are two different distinct worlds. The downward spiral, where you talk in language like you should, you ought, you might, you must, and it's peppered with, oh, they were to blame, it wasn't my fault, I couldn't help it. So it's peppered with that language of not necessarily negativity, but questioning and really not terribly positive. On the other hand, if we view life and we view things from a possibilities point of view, we use different language. How about, what if, what next, and so on. And that gives us that curiosity of mind to help us when we're thinking about unconscious bias. Another part of the Benjamin Zander philosophy is really making us think about how whatever we talk about, it's all invented. We tell stories that are based on our experiences of life. So if we try to describe something, we describe it from our own perspective. And if we work on the basis that it's all invented anyway, we might as well recognise that the framework of storytelling has a lot of meaning, but it is also very much driven by our culture, our differences, our interpretations, and that this impacts on our bias and our privilege. And there's a lovely example that I want to share with you about this. I'm just going to let you read that for a moment. And you can see from that example that actually the way we see things and the way we interpret things is very different. And that's a good example of how one person sees it just as a flat picture, but someone else sees it as a live, living, valued portrait of the person. So our minds are designed to string together in these events into stories, and stories paint pictures, and they create something which develops that connection with others. So they're very powerful. There's nothing wrong with stories as long as we remember that we are telling the story, we are describing something, an event or an activity from our own perspective. And we rationalise it, we make it plausible, because we've thought it through, and we are going to tell it in this way because that's the logic from our point of view. The point I'm trying to make here is it might not be the view of everyone else. They may see something differently. And if you do this little exercise and show people something, and then you ask them to describe what they saw, and the police find this often when they're trying to get people to write down seeing an incident, that no two people will see it exactly from the same viewpoint. So there's a judgment call to be made about where the truth lies, truth being a version of the facts. So that's just a little bit of background to try and stimulate you to think, and I'd be really interested to hear from you whether that resonates with you or not, and whether you have any experiences that you would want to share with others. And if you have, then please do so. But I want to move on now to say, well, that's all very well and good, but what can I do? How can I actually do something about this? And there are some really simple tools that we can use, one of which is this little example here, which is watch, think, act. If we watch, first of all, and we do what I've been talking about, reflecting on our own bias, and this becomes conscious in our mind. When we're choosing to act, we can really think about what we're doing. The next thing is thinking it logically, the better sense, challenging the bias and trying to make some logic to it. Rather than making a knee-jerk reaction to something, really thinking about it and thinking about the context we're operating in and who else is involved, and thinking how we should really think more widely, more broadly. And finally, acting. Act as if the bias does not exist is one of the most powerful anti-bias tools. So to be able to do that, you need to have thought about all the possibilities and then really check that the judgment you're making in order to act, you can honestly say you have been fair and you have been consistent in thinking about it from everybody's perspective. It's a really powerful reflection. As a passionate supporter of inclusion and diversity, I really have to challenge myself, and I've had to learn to do this through my life. But I love this saying, which is our lives our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. And I would ask, how many of us see things that are unfair or unjust and don't do anything about it? We seem to be unable or unwilling to actually speak up. And my challenge here is, if we have a duty to speak up, particularly for those who do not have a voice, who are being marginalised, they may not be heard or respected. And I think it's more important to do it when you see someone else experiencing it than necessarily when it's yourself. It's much more powerful when you're seeing someone being prejudiced or biased to someone to actually act on their behalf. And it does make you feel better too, because you feel that it's much better than remaining silent. And what can we do as groups of people or teams of people, if we work in teams or we work in organisations with other people? We might want to share some of this thinking with them and decide what we can do together. And there are some basic stages of behaviour we can consider when dealing with others. And they're very simple. This is not rocket science. You will recognise this, I know, but it's about making that conscious decision to make people feel welcome. It is the smallest thing we can do to make them feel valued, but more importantly, make sure that their norm is also included and respected. If there's something different about them, they come from a different minority group, or they have some kind of challenge that they bring to the role or to the partnership or to the community group that you're talking about, making them feel welcomed is about listening to them and asking them questions about themselves, learning about them, making them feel that their difference is really, really valued and that they matter. And feeling respected, that comes as a given if you do the first two things, because then they will feel part of the group or the organisation. And it's critical that we value this differentiation in ourselves. And if people can be authentic and be themselves in that situation, then it's better for everyone. Finally, being heard. there's a lot of talk about listening skills, and I think open listening is really quite important. More importantly is listening with an open mind, reflecting on what we can do to help people contribute, to make them feel included and make their voice heard without dismissing it, because it's not something that we would want to promote.
Just to add a tip there, I think before you kind of start on those 4 stages, because one thing that I've found, particularly the longer I've spent in further education, you're coming across learners and members of staff who are from all different walks of life, but actually in my social circle, people are very similar to me. They look like me, they act like me, they talk like me. So there are experiences out there that I don't know how to access their voices. I didn't know, even if I wanted to learn what their experience was like, so I could better support them in the workplace. And I found social media as a really important tool in that. So actively, whether it's, I'm not massively into Twitter. I much prefer Instagram than I do things like Facebook, but I think you can do it on any of those 3 platforms. You can actively search for people. For example, I started to do it with trans activists, so I could better understand that, and I could better understand how to support people, and homeless learners as well. So I sought out people who were vocal on that topic, who were vocal about their experience, and also wrote a lot about how they wish other people treated them and how they wish they were better listened to. And I found that's been a really, really useful way to kind of broaden my education on that.
That's a really good example. And I think that's about seeking what others... Sorry, I've gone too far. I'm going to move back.
So we'll just go back 1 slide.
So seeking to see others. So the process of seeing others in the way in which Naomi's just described is a really important part of unblocking our behaviour and making it much more inclusive. And one of the things I like to use is the iceberg model. This is in the Jennifer Brown book that I mentioned on the previous slide. And the book's called Inclusive Organisations. And this, I think, this picture describes how we are in life. So very often we either go to, in a work situation, for example, the iceberg that we see is the part of the individual that we are wanting to share. So and we choose to share certain characteristics. We would also have lots of things that we might or we might not share about our personalities. It might be our nationality, it might be our background, it might be our sexual orientation. All of these things, we make judgments about how authentic we can be in certain situations, be it work, be it in our social groups or whatever. And I think what the idea of reflecting more on our thinking and the examples about widening our circle enables us to be really much more comfortable about sharing more of ourselves in all of our situations that we're operating in. And there are some statistics on the slide that you can read for yourselves. But I think the thing that we're trying to do with this kind of work is to really ensure that we personally do everything we can to make more people within our circles of experience feel comfortable with themselves, and that we don't use our bias against them to make them feel they can't share their experiences with us. And there is some really quite interesting research that shows that the amount of investment people put into an organisation is really quite interesting. And the work that I'm referring to said that nationally, only 13%, I don't know what's happened to the slide, sorry about that, we'll come back to that, yeah. People on average in the work situation, and this is worldwide, so it's a very generalised statistic, there are 13% of us that put a personal investment into their job. And some of the reasons for that are quite interesting. And by personal investment, I mean, is it a job? Is it a career? Or is it truly a vocation, something that you're passionate about and you would do whether you were being paid for it or not? And most people are somewhere on that scale of it's a job to earn me money to absolutely I would do this if I wasn't even being paid for it. But personal investment in an organisation is about creating a culture that's not about taking anything away from people to give to another. It's really about creating this space that we're talking about for individuals to feel that they can play a part and thrive. And the more organisations do this, the more successful they are at increasing the percentage of people that are personally invested in the job that they do within that organisation. And the IKEA example, to me, is a very good one. You will all, I'm sure, have heard of IKEA. It's a company with a very ethical ethos. It was established with a vision to create a better everyday life for many people. So the idea being that if you don't have to be rich and you don't have to spend a lot of money to get a product that looks good, it is as stylish as any other, and so on. So that is their kind of ethos. It's about good design, it's about low price, it's about affordability by many. And through this, they feel that social inclusion is enhanced. So this is their way of increasing social inclusion. Everybody can afford it. There are exceptions, of course. They create within their company what they call social entrepreneurs, and they develop within their workforce this equality in lifestyle and sustainability. Their workers are inspired to be proud of their work. The company creates opportunities for them to move laterally across organisations within the country or across countries. And they have a very effective 360 company review scheme. And the last review, the workers rated the CEO as 80% of them rated the boss as someone who has a very positive attitude to the workforce. And on their balanced scorecard, which takes everything into account about the boss and the company and the work, it was 90% positive. And so it just shows that a company that invests in people in this way, there is a payback not only for individuals but also for the company. Excuse me, I'm going to cough.
And I think that's really important, because this idea about not taking anything away from one group to give to another, I think that's one of the misconceptions of when we talk about privilege and when people feel threatened or uncomfortable by acknowledging it. And I think there is a process when you first start to kind of try and understand your own biases, where you can learn to feel uncomfortable. Uncomfortable doesn't mean you should stop. Yeah. It's just about reading about other people's experiences, realising that's how it's impacted them. That's not anything personal to you. It's a system that exists that's out of your control. Yeah. But acknowledging it and listening to that is probably one of the most powerful things you can do. And definitely, I mean, I think that's true about the ETF in general, is that individuals are allowed to thrive and contribute. And I think that's part of a healthy work environment, when you realise it's as simple as many heads are better than one. So rather than thinking, oh, if other people start to do well, it's going to take anything from me, actually the best managers and the most successful managers that I've ever worked for know how to pull together a diverse team of people, utilise all their different skills and experiences, and they do that as a team.
Yeah, really good example. So, some ideas. One of the different ideas is to have. I'm going to kind of move on one. Oh, sorry, wrong way. Sorry, gone wrong way. Sorry.
And then one more.
Yeah.
There we go.
So, creating opportunities. If you're in an organisation where you're able to create these opportunities for conversations, that's a really good thing. Some companies are initiating what they call employer resource groups. So in finding ways to group people together, really with a task of either finding a solution to something, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be, how can we make the organisation fairer? How can we make the people in the organisation, what can we do in order to make people feel more valued? And just bringing a diverse group of people together with that question, with some suggestions that can be put into practice, is a really helpful way of stimulating thought, creating new ideas for the organisation, but also going back to that point about making people feel valued. So, this is really, if you're in a leadership role or you're a manager, you can introduce these kind of focus groups. Those are a really powerful way of focusing on a particular topic. It might be that you want to solve a problem or create something for the business, and those focus groups can do that. Empowering people within those focus groups to do something, to achieve something for the organisation is really, really powerful. Thinking beyond race and gender. I think we've moved on a long way from thinking that equality of opportunity is all about either race, gender or disability. I think there is a kind of a real value now placed on the wider context of thinking. And certainly a lot of the work I'm doing now is working with boards and working in organisations where actually thinking skills, I think we've gone beyond recruiting people just for their skills and their experience. What I'm looking for now when I'm part of any kind of recruitment process is, if they've got the skills and they've got the experience, that's great, and we need a diversity of that. But it's the diversity of thinking that is really, really powerful. So bringing together all that we've been talking about, people from different backgrounds, from different stratas of life, to really enrich the debate and the decision making. And those organisations that have done this are finding there is a big return, not only on human, personal investment, but also on the bottom line. They've proved that actually organisations that do have a diversity of thinking improve their balance sheet. So introducing safe spaces for people to really be vulnerable and honest and have those honest conversations. That's harder to do, but it does happen in some organisations. It helps if the person who is listening to those conversations isn't someone that is directly line managing, so it's someone either external coming in to have those honest conversations with people and then report back in an anonymised way, or it's people across larger organisations doing it in a peer or mentoring kind of way. And that can be really, really powerful to get this kind of dialogue going. I think And just moving on. Right, so we've talked a lot there, and I just wondered if you have now any questions for us on what you've heard, whether you agree, or is there anything that you would like to ask us about?
So while you're all thinking about that, we had one question come in earlier, which is quite interesting, so I wonder if Pauline has any thoughts. So this person says, I'm dyslexic and a teacher, assessor and a mental health first aid trainer, as well as having chronic fatigue syndrome. I still know I have a lot to offer and I'm feeling stagnant in teaching and the pay is poor as I can only work part-time. I still go in with all my energy and give my best to deliver exciting, stimulating and rich sessions. However, I don't see opportunities for a person like me in positions. I don't think I have a bias about the job market being open to a person like me getting into a high level, but if I do, I would welcome ways to challenge that and find work that pays me properly for what I do and is stimulating but not exhausting. Am I asking for an impossible utopia, or have you seen examples of people like me succeeding? Thank you for your time.
Well, a really good question. And I'd quite like to, if you're interested and want to talk to me offline, I'd like to have a conversation about that. Because I think there are things that we could do, but through talking that through, it's really hard. I think the general answer is I really admire your spirit and your determination. That kind of comes through in what we're reading, what you're saying that you're having to overcome just to teach, and the fact that you're giving back to others through your teaching role is really admirable. So if I can help you through offline personally, I'd certainly like to. I think there isn't an easy answer with this. I think the more work we do in sessions like this, raising awareness and getting, particularly when I'm working with managers and leaders in organisations, yours is a classic example where we are not valuing people enough, and but again it's back to getting them to recognise the value of someone like you that may not be able to spend as much time as a full-time person, but still has so much to give to the organisation. I don't think I've answered your question very well, but I empathise with you, and I'd really, as I say, I'd really like to kind of talk to you offline about that more.
Okay, so I think that's all the questions for now. Oh no, there's a few that have come through. So someone's saying, how do you deal with someone who applied for your jobs and they still work for you and spread negativity about you? I wonder if that's more, if this person is feeling like somebody who you work with is biased about you perhaps and creating a negative environment at work.
I just want to read that again. How do you deal with someone who applied for your job? Right. So they didn't get the job and they still work for you and they are undermining you. I mean that's not uncommon. My advice would be to take them to one side and actually have an honest conversation with them about it, not in a threatening way, but just to say, this is how you feel. This is making a difficulty for you. It makes a difficulty for the work and the organisation, and you'd really like to understand why they feel that they need to, discuss you in this kind of way. It's not helpful. Having honest conversations with people is hard, but my advice is do it in a very calm and controlled way, but do it in a very authentic and honest way, and tell them how you feel about it, and tell them that you're not happy for it to go on. It's back to the Martin Luther King Jr. slide. Don't put up with it is basically my answer to that question. because you don't deserve to.
Great. And so we've only got about 9 minutes left today, so I'm going to deal with one more question before we finish off the presentation. If you do have any questions that come to you now or after the presentation, do please get in touch. You are welcome to. There'll be a contact email address sent in the post-event email, so you are welcome to get in touch at any point. So for the last question then, I wonder how we can address the bias that is given to those in a higher management grade. This does not automatically mean more knowledge or awareness in an area, but it is often assumed so. And I speak as a person who manages and is managed.
Again, there's no easy answer to that. I think it is through enlightenment and conversation and engagement, and really kind of challenging in a very, doing the nudges in a very positive way. There's no, as I say, there's no easy answer, but it is all of us working together to try and challenge those senior managers' perspectives. I'm certainly coming to the end of my career. I find that we've moved on a long way, but there's still an awful long way for us to go. And part of my work is to try to make a difference in those kind of circumstances. So I'm sorry I don't have an easier answer for you. But what I would say is that part of today's talk is on behalf of the Women's Leadership Network, and we are offering all sorts of support. You can become an individual member of the Women's Leadership Network, and we will work with you through mentoring, through coaching, through all of the different regional activities that we have, because what we are about is really promoting more equality. It's particularly focused on women, but women can have multiple disadvantages, of course, in their lives. But we are also an organisation that works with men too, so it's not just a female-only organisation. We have male champions who are working actively with us too on the equality agenda, because it's only by working together can we truly make a difference with all of this. So please do get in touch if you want some more information about the Women's Leadership Network, or go online to WLN to see what's on offer. And thank you for listening.
Yeah, and I think what I can do with that is, if you weren't registered on the first webinar that was in this series about developing your personal brand, I think that can be something really useful, because although people in formal areas of management are always going to have kind of gain more attention or have more sway in what they say because of their higher position, I think there's an important thing there in knowing who you are and what you represent and your core values, and how you, like you spoke about in the last webinar, Pauline, how you own your own narrative, how you talk about the work you do and what's important to you. And eventually, if you keep talking about what you do and you own your own narrative, people understand that about you, and they know to come to you, and you can gain your, respect through that.
Yeah, very good point. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Okay, so that's everything done for today. Thank you so much for being a part of this really interesting webinar. I found it really, really interesting for my career, so I'm sure that you do too. We will be having a third webinar. That's the final webinar of this leadership series, and that will be about dealing with imposter syndrome. I know that's something that a lot of people have to deal with in the workplace, so that could be really useful. I can send around details of that in the post-event email. So everybody who has been here today, they will now get access to this recording. So don't worry if you didn't manage to catch all of the useful advice that was featured. You can go back and watch that at any time. And in the meantime, I'll put the information about the Women's Leadership Network and contact email address into that post-event email, so you can get in touch if you have any further questions. And those people that have asked them, we will follow them up outside of the webinar. Now, thank you very much, and we hope to see